Pete Hegseth told Congress on the record that he'd be personally accountable for every taxpayer dollar in his department. Every single one. So when asked for a breakdown of $25 billion spent in his war of choice in Iran, he couldn't do it. Not a category, not a number, not an estimate. We'll get you a product after the hearing. That's what the Secretary of Defense said about $25 billion of your dollars. And then he couldn't say what gas cost the day that war started. What you're about to see isn't a political attack. It's something more disturbing. It's a man controlling the largest military budget on Earth, getting caught not knowing the math.
Chair, now we're going to recognize a gentlelady from New Hampshire, Ms. Goodlander.
I want to thank our witnesses for being here today, and I want to begin by getting right to it, since my time is limited, on this $1.5 trillion budget request. Mr. Hegseth, you testified last year and you testified again today that you will be accountable for every American taxpayer dollar that comes to the department, where it goes and why. That's really important since, as has been pointed out, the department has failed 8 audits. The department remains on GAO's high-risk list. The Inspector General just last year alone identified billions of dollars that could have been put to better use, and in questioned costs, that is spending that raised red flags. So this is a crisis right now in accountability of where the dollars of the American taxpayers who are in the middle of a cost crisis, where this money is going. I want to ask about your war in Iran. And Mr. Hurst, you testified earlier today that $25 billion has been spent to date. I just want to clarify that that is money, that taxpayer dollars that have been spent already in this war.
$25 reflects the costs of the war, right? So we've already spent the dollars on munitions and things like that. So we're factoring in cost of munitions expended into that total.
So how much of that has gone towards munitions? Does that include the munitions that have been spent to date?
Yeah, that reflects the munitions that have been spent to date and other operational costs.
Can you give us a breakdown of what those costs are?
We'll work to get you guys a product that has a detailed breakdown of those costs.
Yeah, my concern here is, Mr. Hegseth, you've testified repeatedly that you're going to be accountable for each and every American taxpayer dollar that you spend, that you're going to be accountable for the rationale. Here we are 60 days in to your war of choice in Iran, and you can't give us an answer on a breakdown of the basic breakdown of American taxpayer dollars that have been spent in your war of choice? That's a question for Mr. Hurst. Right now, as you sit here now, you cannot...
We're happy to give you a breakdown. We'll provide you a product after this hearing.
Well, I would love for you to give us this breakdown now and explain to us, was this unbudgeted costs, or was this something the department planned for in advance, since you were appropriated $1 trillion last year?
The department deals with contingency operations all the time within its normal budget.
So this was not budgeted for. My point here is, you know, and General Kane, you've testified to this. We all understand, for you to do your jobs, you need Congress to pass budgets. For us to do our jobs, we need you to give us the details and to be accountable to American taxpayers. And so I got to say, it's an extraordinary dereliction that as you sit here, you cannot account for billions of dollars that have already been spent.
You're briefed on munitions every week. You and your entire staff have every, just so the American public know. It's not as if you don't have munitions levels. You do from us every single week. So you know exactly the numbers you're talking about.
Mr. Hegseth, you have testified that American taxpayers need to know where their dollars are going. And as you sit here today, you can't provide us with a basic answer to the most simple question that you should be able to answer to each and every American taxpayer.
You're asking a question to an answer with an answer you already have.
No, I'm asking you for a breakdown where you said you will be accountable for every taxpayer dollar. You cannot tell us where any of the $25 billion in taxpayer funds that have gone to fund your war of choice in Iran. And I look forward to getting details from our witnesses after this hearing, because the American taxpayers need to know. Mr. Hegseth, can I ask you, do you know what the average cost of a gallon of gas was in this country on February 28th?
Well, it depends on where you live. If you live in California, it's $8.
$2.83. Do you know what the average cost of a gallon of gas is today?
Well, much higher in California.
$4.23. I got to say, Mr. Hegseth, you said you've got a crack economic team that's looking at the impacts of this war on the American taxpayer, and you can't answer this basic question, that should shock the conscience of every American. General Kane, I want to come back to something, a really important principle, and my time is limited. You testified to an important and bedrock principle of American law, that our service members follow lawful orders and lawful orders only. Is that right? Do you agree with the statement, quote, "The military won't follow unlawful orders"?
I do.
Mr. Hegseth, do you agree with that statement?
I do, but understand what you're insinuating at a partisan point.
I'm not. I'm actually quoting you directly, Mr. Hegseth, from April 12th, 2016. And I appreciate that on the record, you've clarified this important principle of American
Gentlelady's time's expired.
Okay, let me just validate what you probably felt watching that. Because there's a very specific kind of discomfort that comes from watching someone confidently promise accountability while being completely unable to demonstrate it in real time. And I want to make sure you understand exactly why what just happened is more serious than it looks on the surface. So I went ahead and did some digging, because Pete Hegseth certainly wasn't going to do it for you. Let's start with the promise itself, because without it, nothing else in this hearing lands as hard as it should. Hegseth has testified before Congress, not once, not twice, but repeatedly, that he will be personally accountable for every single taxpayer dollar entering the Department of Defense. That is not a vague aspiration or a talking point he stumbled into. That is a specific, sworn commitment made to the legislative body that controls his department's funding. Now hold that promise in your mind, because we're going to come back to it. The Department of Defense has failed 8 consecutive audits. 8. It remains on the Government Accountability Office's high-risk list, which is not a routine designation. It flags agencies with systemic vulnerabilities to waste, fraud, and mismanagement serious enough to require urgent reform. So when Hegseth walks into a hearing room and makes sweeping promises about accountability, he isn't starting from neutral ground. He's walking into a room that already has a decades-long paper trail of his department losing money on a scale most people genuinely cannot visualize. And then comes the question that should have been the easiest one in the room. Goodlander asked for a basic cost breakdown of the war in Iran, a war that, by the department's own testimony, has already consumed $25 billion in 60 days. Not a classified intelligence briefing, not a real-time operational map, just a breakdown of where 25 billion taxpayer dollars already went. And neither Hegseth nor his budget official could provide one. The answer was, "We'll get you a product after the hearing." I want you to sit with that phrase for a second, because it is doing an enormous amount of work. A product. That is not an answer. That is the language of bureaucratic delay dressed up to sound like a process. And here's what made me go look something up. Hegseth's own defense was that Congress already receives detailed munitions data from the department every single week. I looked into how that weekly reporting actually works, and he's right. The department does submit regular munitions expenditure updates to relevant oversight committees, which means the information Goodlander was asking for exists. It existed when he was sitting in that chair. The numbers were available. He just didn't have them ready. And that is not an oversight. That is a choice, and a revealing one, about how seriously he takes the oversight he promised to welcome. Now, I want to be fair about something, because this matters. There are legitimate reasons why some operational cost details can't be disclosed in a public hearing during an active military engagement. Classified specifics about munitions stockpiles and targeting operations are genuinely sensitive. I understand that argument, and it's a real one. But Hegseth didn't make that argument. He didn't say, "I can't share that in an open hearing for national security reasons." He said he'd send a product later. Those are completely different things. One is a principled limitation. The other is a man who came unprepared to a hearing where this question was absolutely obviously going to be asked. Then came the gas question, and this is the part I think people are going to dismiss as a political stunt. But I'd push back on that pretty hard. Goodlander asked Hegseth what gas cost on February 28th, the day this war started, and what it costs today. She wasn't asking because she didn't know. She was asking because Hegseth had testified in his own words that his department has a crack economic team analyzing the war's impact on the American taxpayer. So she gave him the simplest possible test of whether that claim is true. The answer is $2.83 on February 28th. $4.23 today, a $1.40 increase in 60 days, and the Secretary of Defense, who controls the largest military budget on Earth, who claims his team is monitoring economic impacts, deflected to California prices and spoke in generalities. Think about what that actually means for a moment. The person filling their tank on the way to work this morning knows that number. The secretary who started the war that moved that number does not. That gap is not just embarrassing, it's a window into something structural, when the people making war and peace decisions are genuinely disconnected from the economic reality those decisions create on the ground. The word accountability stops meaning anything. It becomes a performance of accountability, and performances are designed to be watched, not verified. Now let's talk about the final exchange, because I think it's the sharpest moment in the entire hearing, and it went by fast enough that it's easy to miss what actually happened. Goodlander turned to General Keane and asked him to confirm a bedrock principle of American military law, that service members follow lawful orders, and lawful orders only. Keane confirmed it without hesitation. Then Goodlander turned to Hegseth and asked the same question. He said yes, but immediately added that he understood what she was insinuating. Here's the thing, she wasn't insinuating anything. Those exact words, "The military won't follow unlawful orders," came from a statement Pete Hegseth himself made on April 12, 2016. She was quoting him back to himself and asking him to confirm it on the record. That is all she was doing. And his first instinct was to treat his own prior statement as a partisan attack. I went back and looked at the context of that 2016 statement, and it was made in a very different political environment, one where Hegseth was commenting on executive overreach from the other direction. The principle he stated then is the same principle now. The only thing that changed is who's in the White House. When you are confronted with your own words and your first response is to call that a partisan insinuation, rather than simply confirming what you said, that tells you something important about how this person processes accountability. It means the principle now feels dangerous to him. It means affirming that soldiers follow the law carries implications he'd rather not be on record supporting. In a democracy that places civilian oversight of the military at the absolute center of its constitutional architecture, a defense secretary who gets defensive about confirming that service members follow lawful orders is not a small thing to scroll past. So, what does all of this add up to? Here's the line I'd use if someone asked me to explain this hearing in plain terms. Pete Hegseth has mastered the language of accountability without internalizing its requirements. He knows what accountability sounds like. He can perform it fluently in an opening statement. But when you ask him to demonstrate it, with numbers, with specifics, with the basic factual preparation a Secretary of Defense should walk into any hearing carrying, it isn't there. And that distinction matters enormously, because language without substance isn't accountability, it's cover. The $25 billion this war has already cost didn't disappear into an accounting abstraction. Every dollar spent on munitions in a conflict that was never publicly debated before it started is a dollar that wasn't spent somewhere else, on veterans' health care, on the infrastructure bill that keeps getting delayed, on the social programs being cut in the same budget that's asking for $1.5 trillion. And the person responsible for those trade-offs couldn't tell you where the money went. The American taxpayer is not an abstraction either. They are the person who pulled into a gas station this morning and noticed that something has changed since February. They deserve someone in that hearing room who noticed too. If this kind of breakdown matters to you, subscribe so you don't miss the next one. These moments reshape how power works in this country, and they move too fast to catch alone.